Hello everyone, I'm Sylvia from Fairlight Tarot. Welcome to my channel and welcome to US Games versus Lo Scarabeo, Clash of the Titans. So after decades of debating whether one is better than the other, whether they actually evolve in the production value, etc, 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 I've decided today to have a thorough look at the decks that I own, the most iconic decks that I own from these two publishers throughout 4 decades, and finally decide, at least for myself, if I prefer one or the other. But let's have a look. So first thing first, I wanted to start with the oldest decks that I have from these two publishers. And I think that we're starting from the 90s, the early 90s. I think the oldest ones that I have is my Dylan Dog, the Tarot of the Nightmares from 1991. I think I had a couple of Scarabeo decks from the 80s, but unfortunately I cannot find them anymore. They might still be in Italy somewhere, in a box somewhere. And I definitely have something from the 90s from US Games. So let's have a look. One of the oldest ones that I have, if we want to start with US Games, I'm just going to zoom in. So you probably recognize this. This is the medieval Scapini tarot. This is very interesting because I had never actually paid attention to this, but it says the medieval Scapini tarot has been printed in Switzerland by A.G. Müller. So A.G. Müller is another publisher. It still exists and it's still printing decks, although let's say one famous one from A.G. Müller is definitely the Vision Quest tarot, and another one is the Margarete Peterson tarot. But it says here that it has been printed by A.G. Müller expressly for US Games. So that's actually really interesting because I did not know that A.G. Müller used to print for US Games. So this one is, the copyright is 1985 by US Games. I don't think I bought it in 1985, but this is a deck that I bought new, so I probably bought it in the late 80s. And it's the one that has the little window here. I don't think I've ever used it. If you don't have this deck, it's actually a really beautiful deck. I hardly ever looked at it, you know, which is very sad because it's the indication of the fact that I did have that compulsion to buy decks even in the late 80s. And then, you know, I wasn't even using them. Very interesting deck. I've actually seen this deck many times. Not mine, obviously not my edition, but someone else's. Beautiful artwork. So, but I'm not here to talk about the decks. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to have a look at these decks, show them to you, but also at the same time I want to kind of describe my history with and my relationship with, that's a beautiful death card, with these two publishers, because having been born and grown up in Italy, it was so much easier for me to obviously buy Lo Scarabeo decks because Lo Scarabeo is published in Torino, which is in northern Italy. But US Games was quite readily available in Italy, which is ironic because now US Games in Australia is very hard to find unless we're talking about decks that have been published over 6 months ago. Let's say that there's not a lot of love that comes from US Games for Australia. We cannot order from US Games website directly. And, you know, which is, okay, it's understandable, but yeah, I do have a parcel collect service in Portland, Oregon. So I could eventually order from them and have it shipped there, but they don't even allow me to do that, which is a bit disappointing. Which means that I have to get my decks out of Amazon, and so it's not, you know, as soon as they get published, I never get access to the sales. And now that they're going to close Book Depository from the UK, I don't know how I'm going to source US Games decks. I honestly don't know. because it's going to be even harder. But in any case, so this is one of the aspects that, you know, to me, and this is exclusively, let's say, personal view, in the sense that obviously all of you who live in the US will probably love US games because, you know, they have these sales, they're readily available. I believe that the domestic shipping is even not too bad. And you can have access to these really, really beautiful decks, and it's not hard to find them, and you can also buy them at your local retailer, etc. So this is very personal, but this is what this video is going to be about. It's just my view over how these two publishers evolved in their production value, whether they listen to what the tarot community has been saying for probably decades, and what the differences between the older decks and the newer decks are, and what I finally think about these decks. Do I prefer one or the other, or do I prefer some aspects of one and some other aspects of the other? We'll have a look at that. So when it comes to the cardstock quality, I tend to agree with the general opinion in the tarot community. The cardstock of the older US Games decks is exceptionally good. It's the kind of battery feel that reminds me a lot of the Somnia tarot. If you have it, you will know what I mean. The card size is, for me, it's a bit big, because as you can see, I cannot actually, let's zoom out because otherwise I cannot wrap my fingers unless I bend them. If I need to bend the deck, but I can't really wrap my fingers around it, which means that I cannot riffle shuffle, which is fine because it means that I will have to really take care of the decks. I do believe though that there have been different productions during the years from US Games when it comes to tarot size, and we'll have a look at it later because there are a few differences. But in any case, so this is the oldest deck that I have from US Games, and it's the Medieval Scapini Tarot. The trial would be now making sure that I can actually fit the cards and the little white book at the front instead of having to mix it in the middle, for not being able to actually close the box, the top box. But let's see. Yeah, I can actually do it without any problems at all. So this is definitely 9 out of 10. Quite happy about it. So that was a good experience, but let's have a look at equally old decks from Lo Scarabeo. This, I'm sure it's from 1991, simply because it actually says so in the pages here. So yeah, Torino 1991, and it's the Dylan Dog deck, which is, if you watch my channel, you know how much I love this deck, because Dylan Dog was, still is actually, a graphic novel that has been published by Bonelli Editore in Milano. And it's about this character who is the precursor of, you know, Dean and Sam of Supernatural. He's basically investigating supernatural beings and the stuff at Nightmare, really. So this deck is majors only, but to me is incredibly important. I really, really love this deck. They then produced, because it was such a popular deck, they then produced a full 78 cards deck, which I also have from, I think it was back in 2017. But let's have a look at the cardstock. So compared to the US Games, this feels a lot more papery. It also doesn't feel as sturdy, I have to say. I'm actually quite worried about using this deck. As a matter of fact, I don't think I have for readings. I do obviously look at it, but it doesn't feel like it can actually take a beating, if you know what I mean. Although this is a bit unfair to compare these two decks, because I have to say that these collections, so the collection about graphic novels, came out as some kind of a special collection, and I don't think that they were meant to be, you know, your workhorse deck. They were not really meant to be used as much as probably the Scapini, the medieval Scapini, was meant to be used. But if we have a look at this other tarot, which is, I'm pretty sure it's also from the 90s, but unfortunately I have looked everywhere and there's no publication date, and in the internet there's a lot of different opinions about it. What I can tell you for sure is that this deck is from the 90s, if not older, because it still has the price in liras. So it's from the collection Lo Scarabeo Mignon, which is, as you can tell, mini, or, you know, small. And this is also one of those decks that was meant to be for collection purposes, I would say. It's by Sergio Topis, the Universal Tarot. I absolutely love Sergio Topis' art style. Let's have a second look here, but I did have a look before and there's no publication year. So yeah, that's a pity because I can't be sure of the year. So this might even be older. If it was made in the late 80s, it would have been older than the Landau Tarot. But in any case, so this is the deck. It's absolutely beautiful. You will probably recognize the art style because this is Sergio Topis, the author or the creator of the Primordial Tarot, which is a very recent publication by Lo Scarabeo. We go back to the fact that the cardstock is very papery, and you know, the corners are actually sharp and square, not rounded, which points to, again, the idea that possibly this deck has been conceived as a collectible item and not necessarily as a deck that you would use to read with. The artwork is just absolutely gorgeous. I really love it. I said in a video, I don't remember when, that I'm also looking for the Tarot of the Origins. So this is the Universal Tarot, but I'm looking for the Tarot of the Origins as well, possibly in a full size, not the mini. Sooner or later on eBay I'll probably find it. It's fine. So this is, I would say, compared to the US games, it's definitely not as good, but as I said, it's very difficult to make a comparison between those two because these are definitely collectible items. So in order to be fair to Lo Scarabeo, what I'm going to do, I'm going to compare the Scapini US games with the Manara Lo Scarabeo. This is a very old edition of Lo Scarabeo. You can tell by the layout. Unfortunately, I cannot really tell you what year. And the year 2000, okay. So I thought it was actually older than that, but it's the year 2000. It's okay. It's still, you know, this is 2023. So we're talking about 23 years ago. It's a fairly long time. Now, this deck has been used a few times, so I don't want to get age restricted. And if you know this deck, you'll know that it's rather spicy, let's put it this way. So I'm not necessarily going to show you the cards, or I'll do that very quickly. But just to give you an idea of the quality of the decks by Lo Scarabeo back then, this is, again, a little white book. Obviously, it has only 1 or 2 sentences for each and every card, which is very typical of Lo Scarabeo. You all know that. The little white books by Lo Scarabeo have been very disappointing until, I think, until very recently, in which they're actually trying to make an effort, and I really want to commend them for that, because you know, when they do start to finally listen to the tarot community, that's when we need to encourage them, to show them that that's the right path to follow. What I do like is that, and I haven't seen it, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the, let's say, in the text from the 10 years and 15 years ago, they didn't actually put the planets and the elemental symbols, which is, you know, rather well appreciated. But when we talk about, say, cardstock, this is where I actually have to say that I prefer this deck rather than the Scapini. So let's take this card, which is okay. So the size is a lot better. I can show you for my small hands. Please understand that every time that I say better or worse, and I give my opinion. That's exactly what it is. It is my opinion. And as an opinion, a personal opinion, it's not objective. It also depends on my personal experience with the decks, the memories that I have associated with the decks, and all these kind of things that may not be shared by probably anyone else. But the objective things is that indeed this is a smaller size. So just to compare it to the Scapini, because it's just so much easier when we know what we're talking about, isn't it? So here we are, and it is rather smaller, as you can tell. So the US Games is not just taller, but it's also wider. And this means to me that it's just easier to riffle shuffle. So I can actually wrap my fingers around it, not having to bend the deck. It's a very kind of really beautiful, even I feel like I appreciate this kind of battery matte cardstock even more than the Scapini, so the US Games. This was a deck that was made to be used a lot. So I think that this is a fairer kind of comparison to the Scapini than the first two that I showed you. One of the, let's say, the pet peeves that everyone has when we talk about Lo Scarabeo is that why do they always have to write, you know, the name of the card, the title of the card is like 50 different names, and you know, why the number so big? That's definitely something that they kept on doing for a long time. Like, it's not something, okay, I'm not going to show you too many cards because otherwise it's going to be a problem, but just for you to know, this is definitely something that has been, the big borders and top and bottom has been very common in all of the Lo Scarabeo decks until just very recently, I must say. And that's to me, it's just a waste. It's a waste of real estate, because this image is absolutely gorgeous. So why not showing us, you know, the entire image? Why having to cut into the image to just put these massive borders? I mean, okay, we get it, it's the tower. We know it's number 16, so it's the tower. Just write it maybe in English and in Italian, because I understand that they want to write in Italian because it is an Italian publisher. But we've got German and French as well. I don't know whether that's necessary or not, but I would say that for working purposes, this is an excellent cardstock. I really like it, and I do prefer this size to the medieval Scapini. So when it comes to, let's say, this decade, so late 80s and early 90s, I would say that I probably prefer Lo Scarabeo for the simple reason that this is a deck that I used where, for example, you've seen that the medieval Scapini is practically mint, and the reason would be that I cannot use it, my hands cannot hold it. So it's beautiful that it's got such a really nice big cards, because you can see the details of the cards. But if you're not able to use it, and I buy a deck in order to use it, not simply because I want a collectible item, then, you know, I will have to go with this one. Simple as that. One other thing that I wanted to show you is about this gimmick at the bottom of the tack box. So generally speaking, US Games stack boxes have a flap like that, so at the top and at the bottom, whereas in the older decks, Lo Scarabeo was only having the flap at the top because you need to open the box. But at the bottom, they had this kind of solution, which is a lot better. Why? Because it means that whenever you put back in the little white book and the deck, which fits quite snug in the attack box, you won't have problems when pushing it down. You won't have problems in getting the bottom flap open, which is something that I think every single person who has been reading tarot ever will probably know about, and has been at least cursing a couple of times at decks specifically from US games because of that problem. So the older ones from Lo Scarabeo had this solution, which is very, very smart. That's also a point that goes to Lo Scarabeo. So I have another couple of older decks from both publishers. I think the ones from the US games, these two are older than the ones that I have from Lo Scarabeo. So the Tarot of the Cat People, so this one is from the 80s, I think. 1984, but it has been reprinted in 2004. So, and I feel like this edition is from 2004. And this one, the Thoth, this one is also from the 80s. 1978, no, 1983. So this is the reprint from 1983. So this one is from 2007. It says so inside. I checked a couple of times, that I'll show you later. And this is an older edition of the Egyptian Tarot, also from the year 2000. I just wanted to show you that even in later decks, we still have, although this one unfortunately broke down, but as you can tell, it doesn't have a flap. It has that kind of hexagonal solution to keep the deck, let's say, fitting in the box. And this one has the same. I really, really love this deck. I mean, the artwork is fantastic. If you don't know it, it's if you have a cat, you'll love this deck, because it's the creator has imagined a world where cats are basically overlords, and humans and cats rule together. And so each and every card has got these really wonderful looking cats as companions to the humans. And it's very quirky. I really love the art style as well. It's kind of very similar to Puntilism, like that. The colors are amazing. I really like it. And it's very quirky. So this deck, this is when I feel like, this is from 2004, we said. So this is when I feel like US games started changing the quality of the cardstock, unfortunately. Because it has definitely a different feel, more plasticky, let's say, than the medieval Scapini. However, I have to say this deck is definitely a smaller size, and to me is actually so much easier to shuffle because, thanks to that. One thing that I want to show you when I talk about the flap at the bottom is this. So you go and you tuck in your deck, and there you go. So basically, where the flap goes in at the bottom, the deck stays up. You cannot really push it down. You have to be doing a little bit of maneuvering, which I'm so used to do that it's not a big deal for me anymore. But it can be quite frustrating sometimes, especially when you're reading for clients and you're changing decks. And you want to, because if you have OCD like me, I have to put the decks back into the boxes. Otherwise, I feel like I left something incomplete. And, you know, fumbling around because you can't do it immediately, it just takes away all the confidence, and it looks very awkward. And your client will be looking at you thinking, oh my goodness, she can't even put the deck back in the box. You know what I mean? So I do appreciate Lo Scarabeo doing that. Thank you. Let's have a look at this one from, as I said, 1983. This is the giant edition, and I have been using it like crazy. So this one is very, very used. Very used. And as you can see, because I had the same problem with the tuck box, I had to put the white book in the middle. And this one somehow, this thing somehow acts in such a way that you don't have the same problem. Talking again about the cardstock though, this again is actually nicer. So I think it definitely, I don't know whether they started with this one, probably not, but in any case, this is the edition of 2004. So in the year 2000, they started changing the cardstock, because this is prior to that, and it's got still that kind of really good cardstock US Games used to have. So this is definitely a plus. When it comes to these two, so this one is a gorgeous deck, the Circle of Life Tarot. I have to say I have mixed feelings, and I always say that every time I show this deck in my channel, because it's a round deck, and because back then they did not think about putting the dot to point at the upper part of the card. And so you can't tell. So to me, this is very, very frustrating, because every time that I shuffle this deck, really changes the direction of the cards. And on top of everything, because they kind of realized that one solution they thought would have been smart is to actually put all the names in different languages of the suits around, you know, this kind of frame, which is not very smart at all, because at first when you look at the cards, you don't really know what's up and what's down. You can look at the number, but the number is not on the core cards. So in this case, you really have to, hang on a second, so okay, so this looks like it's upright like this, but could it be like that? And so it really distracts you, because you have to struggle to find the right way up. And I really do not appreciate that, because I need to focus on the card. And besides, this is a really gorgeous deck. I mean, the artwork is just amazing. It can kind of tell, of course, but this is upright, but it takes me a minute. And I just don't want to, you know, miss time. I don't want to waste time having to decide where is up and where is down. So what they did in later editions, this is from 2007. In later editions, they actually, I think they also changed the color of the backs. I think they're blue now. But in any case, so they put a dot to indicate that, you know, that part is up, which is much better. And so this is from 2007, it's the Circle of Life. Again, see how much easier it is to put it back in the box because of this solution here. To the point that whenever I have to put a deck back in the box and it's US Games, I actually hesitate. When I'm on camera, I actually hesitate, because I'm like, oh, it's gonna take me ages now. I remember, no, it was okay, because I used the fact that I put the little white book in the middle. So I remember I posted on Instagram probably a year ago a comment about that, and saying that every time that I use a US Games deck and I put it back in, I always whisper to myself, come on US Games, come on, you can do it, you can do it. And so there were like 50 comments of people saying, oh no, you have to put the white book in the middle. I know that. So this is the Egyptian tarot, and just to show you, I mean, the consistency of Lo Scarabeo. I think that Lo Scarabeo early on kind of found a good combination, a good formula between cardstock quality, let's say, and finish, and the tactile experience that it provides, and size, the way in which they were designing the tuck box, and also the white book. And they just used that combination over and over again. Again, very easy to just put it back in the box. So I would say that from the year 2000, even though this one was older, but it was reprinted in the year 2000, I would say because US Games actually changed the quality of the cardstock, I'm actually gonna go with Lo Scarabeo again on this one, but it's a very close vote. It's a very, very close vote, and I feel like if you ask me again, maybe, I don't know, 2-3 years from now, I'll probably change my mind. I don't know. But right now, I think I'm still gonna go with Lo Scarabeo. So let's have a look at the next decade, let's say from 2010 to 2020. I feel that there has been a lot of changes going on in both the publishers. And I feel that whatever changes they came up with in that decade, they then perfected in the decade after, and they are still perfecting now. But let's start with the US Games decks. So I just wanted to show you the Deviant Moon Tarot. Now this one, it was printed in, so this one was printed in originally in 2013 and then in 2018. So this is the print from 2018. As you can tell, they already made some kind of an experiment on the size of the cards, and they started those years, they started changing the production value as well, in the sense that they went from attack boxes to two-part boxes. And I feel that this one, 2017, the Spirit Sun Tarot, is probably one of the first one. Correct me if I'm wrong. Not saying it's the first one, but one of the first ones. And this is from 2020. So I actually prefer, I think that the two-part box is very elegant. It's very good when it's not too big, when it fits the deck and the guidebook. And it's definitely an improvement from the tuck box, because you don't have that awkwardness when you put it back in, or even when you take it out. However, when it comes to size, I think that the Deviant Moon Tarot, this one is the borderless edition. I do not have the one with borders, so the size of the card may be completely different. But when it comes to this deck, I will show you what I mean with comparing it with the Ghost and Spirits Tarot by Lisa Hunt, which is a deck from 2011. So this is from 2011. Again, they did some kind of experimentation on the size. So as you can tell, the Ghost and Spirits is actually wider, but the Deviant Moon is much taller, which to me is a bit of a problem, because this is one of my favorite decks for many types of work, not just shadow work. I actually really love it. I have the coffee table book that goes with this deck. The story behind it is absolutely amazing, and I love that US Games is doing this. What I really love about US Games, about this, related to this deck, is that I watched an interview by Simon at the Hermit's Cave to Patrick Valenza, and Patrick was explaining how patient and supportive US Games have been throughout the years of his work. And I really appreciate that. Whenever a publisher is not constantly nagging the artist, the creator, to come up with something because, you know, they have orders to fulfill, etc. I really like it, because they actually let the creator do their thing. And being supportive is something that is probably taken for granted, but it's actually not happening very often, I can assure you, in the publishing world. So I really appreciate that. What I don't like is that I cannot reshuffle, because it actually I can't really wrap my fingers around it. It's really hurting, which is a pity, because obviously I will have to shuffle it in a different way. Overhand is also kind of difficult this way, so I will have to overhand it this way. But in any case, I manage, because this deck is so gorgeous that I don't care. Now, the change happened after that, because either they started listening to the tarot community, or, you know, they wanted to probably also give a bit of a premium to the decks that were producing in such a way that they could also situate themselves on a different band for the marketing purposes. So if you think about the starting from 2010, we had a lot of revolutions when it comes to the tarot world, because many artists started producing their own decks, which means that there were a lot of more indie decks being, you know, sold out there. It was not just mass market decks. It's also when YouTube started really having a lot of subscribers, and there were already, you know, people showing the decks on YouTube. So the fusion of showing these decks to the general public was much easier. The networking was a lot easier. If someone in the US was showing a deck on their channel, someone from South Africa watched that video and they wanted that deck. So they had to make sure that they were situating themselves, they were positioning themselves with a bit of an edge compared to other publishers. Let's not forget that those are the years in which also other publishers started releasing tarot decks. So I'm thinking about Hay House, for example. There was a big one. But also Rockpool, even though Rockpool started mainly with oracle decks, we've seen in the last 2-3 years that they've actually started releasing a lot of tarot decks as well. So there's a lot of competition, and one thing that a good publisher does is try and find an edge, try and find something for which, you know, a tarot collector like myself or a tarot reader like myself would definitely choose them rather than another publishing company. And we'll see that Lo Scarabeo had to adapt as well, but somehow I believe that they haven't caught up yet. So I believe that they started with the Spirit Sun Tarot, this 2-part box with a thumb cutout, which is very, very welcome. But it's also the feel of the box is amazing. I really like it. It's so soft and silky. Now this deck, unfortunately or fortunately, has been modified because again, the size of the cards was just too big for my hands, and because I really, really like this deck, I wanted to use it, so I just trimmed the borders off. But if you can see the guidebook, the original size of the cards was exactly like this. So if we have a look, yeah, I only trimmed off the borders. So this deck, let's have a look at the production value when it comes to the cardstock. Fortunately, I have to say, this cardstock, even though it's still not the one of, let's say, the Thoth Tarot that I showed before, or the Medieval Scapini, that was fantastic. It's not as bad as, you know, the noughties, the decks they produced, they released in the noughties. So let's say that they went back to a softer kind, a less plasticky kind of cardstock, which I really, really like. And but they did keep this kind of bigger size, even though you cannot see it in here. Let's have a look at the mystical moments. Now, there's something that I was kind of disappointed about, because when I saw this, first of all, they came out with the oracle of the mystical moments, and it was absolutely stunning. The production value was amazing. The cardstock was fantastic. And then when I saw this, I was like, I really need to get the tarot. And then I got it. And whoops. So it comes with a very sharp silver gilding, which is the kind of sharp gilding that actually you can feel it on your skin. I can assure you, it is very sharp and it will scratch your fingers when you shuffle it. It's the same size as the original Spirit Song, so it's rather large. For me, too large, because as you can see, can't really do anything about it. But also, I mean, look at this. It's the glossiest tarot deck that I have in my collection. I kid you not. It catches the light in any possible way, which I understand it was done on purpose, obviously, because of they wanted to, let's say, make the vibrant colors stand out even more. This deck is all about the colors, and the artwork is absolutely superb. I really, really like Catherine's artwork. It's a kind of surreal, dreamy, oniric kind of art style, which I really love. It's very conducive of introspective kind of work, which I appreciate, because it was probably one of the very first deck that got so far away from the traditional depiction of the cards. Look at this world card, it's amazing. That I was actually really appreciated, and I really enjoyed looking at the cards and using this deck. So even though there are a few things that I don't appreciate about this deck, I still really enjoy using it, I have to say. And it was very one of the first ones that came out with, at least in my collection, let's say, that came out with alternative cards or alternative gender cards for traditionally gendered cards. So for example, the kings were also not just men but also women, and you could choose whether you wanted a king man or a king woman. I think I have a bit of a mix because I like that possibility. But it's a beautiful deck, absolutely gorgeous. But as I said, the cardstock is too shiny, definitely too shiny, to the point that every time that I want to make an example when talking about a cardstock, I actually compare it to this, and every time I go, yeah, it's shiny, but it's not mystical moment shiny. So this is, and I'm not the only one saying that. So this is what they've done, let's say, between 2010 and 2020 in order to, you know, on the one hand, beat competition, but also they needed to find their own, I think, their own essence in the market. What do they want to represent? What kind of decks do they want to produce? And I have to say that thanks to the fact that they started also taking on board artists that were very unconventional, non-traditional, we've had some exceptionally good tarot decks thanks to US games, let's say, courage. Now, when it comes to Lo Scarabeo decks from the same decade, got the, I think the oldest one is the tarot. If I am not wrong, this is from 2014, but let's have a look. It might say so on the little white book. You probably all know this deck. It's a very special deck. A lot of people, I've seen it used many times for inner child work because of the particular style of the artwork. Yes, 2014, Lo Scarabeo. So this deck is very beautiful as well. You may like it or not. There's a lot of mixed opinions, you know, on social media platforms about this deck because the artwork may be seen as a bit creepy, in the sense that it does tend to represent, you know, children in very confrontational, let's say, situations. Obviously, I'm taking care not to show the worst cards, the most confrontational cards, but there's a few of them that have a bit of a visceral kind of reaction in many of us, and that's why it is used so very often for inner child work, because it does tap into that kind of a voice that has been silenced for so long, and it has been necessarily damaged. But we're here to talk about the decks and the production value. So I will say that they went from the solution that I was showing you before to an even better one. So now they definitely glue the bottom flap in such a way that you got a perfectly flat kind of bottom. When it comes to the titles in 50 languages, I actually removed them. Well, in this specific example, they don't even have titles at all. You just have the symbol of the suit and the number, which is, you know, it's enough. It's enough. You don't really need more than that now, do you? So it's actually very much appreciated. The only thing is that I still find that the borders are slightly too big for my taste. And mind you, it's not a matter just of being big, it's a matter that they're not proportional. So you have slightly wider border on the top and the bottom, but then they're thinner on the side. So it looks like the deck, when it comes to the border, is actually not really well balanced. But that's fine. They kept one thing steady, and that's the size. And I really appreciate this size, because if you have small hands like mine, or injuries like I have, this is a very easy deck to shuffle. And I'm very grateful for that. When it comes to the cardstock, I feel like they've been pretty consistent, let's say, throughout the decades. So it's the typical good, very good Lo Scarabeo cardstock. When it comes to the guidebook, this is when they started understanding that if they wanted to expand, like, you know, US Games was doing, they had to put the guidebook in different languages as well. Mind you, they still were doing it because you've got Italian, you've got English, you've got Spanish and French. And I don't know whether you still need that. I feel that US Games is not doing that. US Games is probably just giving you the English option, which gives the possibility to expand on the meaning of the cards, because obviously they have, you know, more space. And they're still selling worldwide, right? So it means that probably that's enough. But in any case, what I like to do sometimes is just, I need to check the difference between the description in the English section and the Italian section, just to see whether they say something different. It's a bit of a thing that I do with Lo Scarabeo decks. Now, another tarot that I wanted to show you, because this is instead when Lo Scarabeo understood that they needed to up the ante, they needed to up their game, because, you know, US Games was doing that. So they looked at US Games, two-part boxes, and the way in which they were distancing themselves from the top box. And they came out with this, which I believe is called a coffre, like the French word for box, let's say. And it's this is one of the first ones that came out like this. And there were still a few things that I believe that they still needed to fine-tune in order to have a good production value. It's a very sturdy box. I do appreciate that it's very beautiful, because it is, and you know, it feels very safe. Like it doesn't feel like it's gonna just open by itself when you're carrying the deck and you just maybe carry it upside down and you feel like it's gonna fall off. It doesn't, because it's actually very it fits quite snug. The problem is that the deck itself fits a bit too snug into this box. So during the years, I reckon that they have to kind of change, that had changed it. And I think one of the latest examples that I have is the Symbolic Soul Tarot, which is actually perfect. I think they perfected that kind of, you know, mix between the quality, but also the measurements and the price and everything. But let's have a look at the Santa Muerte, because this was one of the first ones that they produced in a way that it was made in order to defeat competition and face the fact that US Games was really, really up in their game. So it comes with this guidebook, which is still multiple languages again, you know, but it's slightly different because it's got color images, which is very appreciated, especially for this deck, which is absolutely gorgeous. It's fantastic. And it does give you a couple of spreads as well. Oh, this is also in Russian, which I hadn't seen in Lo Scarabeo before. This is interesting. So instead of reducing the number of languages, they're actually expanding them. What I do notice is that they did make an effort on the description of the cards. It's not just a description of the general meaning of the card according to the RWS system. It's actually something related to the card itself. And that, I feel, was a, you know, it was a very important change that Lo Scarabeo did, at least when it comes to guidebooks. Very, very much appreciated. And by the way, I absolutely love this deck, even though the cardstock is not my favorite, because I think that they went one too far, in the sense that they understood that they needed to make a bit of a more valuable production, but they thought that, you know, glossy cardstock was all the rage. Where if you actually looked at the preferences of the tarot community, you will see that, yes, of course, it looks pretty. But because we have to accept that we live in a world in which social media is actually quite important, a lot of us are actually taking photos of these cards and videos. And when the cardstock is this glossy, it catches the light, and you can actually see in many cases when you're taking a photo or a video, it will actually white out the images on the cards when it's that glossy. I love this Hierophant with the Ouija board. So this is one of my favorite decks, and it probably shows because I've been using it so many times. And this is by far my favorite 8 of Cups because of the colors. The blue hues are my favorite, but also because of this crown of cups, but they're also skulls, and they're filled, and you know, this person looks as if they're pensive, they're thinking, they're, you know, they're depicted in that position in which you're actually thinking. So it looks as if it's about to say, should I actually leave or not? And in the same time, because they're thinking, they're just tilting their head forward, which means that they're actually spilling from the cups, which is so poetic. I really enjoy the take of Fabio Listrani, who's the creator on this deck. Fabio Listrani has a very good cooperation with Lo Scarabeo. He's also the author of Goetia and Notoria. And I think there's another one in the make. I'm not too sure, but I think I heard something. And also the Night Sun Tarot. So this, let's say this is the way in which Lo Scarabeo was responding to the major changes US game was going through. And for these two, I will actually be a bit too difficult to pick one. I would say that they are equal. So I'm giving the vote to both of them because I really love what US Game is doing, and I really appreciate that the way in which they're supporting the artists, and also artists that are quite unconventional. But I also really appreciate the effort made by Lo Scarabeo in achieving this really beautiful production. So now we're going to have a look at the latest decks that I've got into my collection, and these are from, let's say, 2020 onwards. And so we're talking about the Tarot of Tales, which is very recent. I only got it, I think, maybe a couple of weeks ago. The Lorenzi Tarot, which is from last year, but I only got it also a couple of weeks ago. The Symbolic Soul Tarot and the Dark Side of Tarot for Lo Scarabeo. Let's have a look at the US games first. I have to say that I believe, honestly, that we live in the golden age of tarot producers, publishers. Because at least when it comes to, you know, US games and Lo Scarabeo, when I look at Schiffer, I still shake my head because they still haven't done anything to improve the quality of their decks. I have to say though, Rockpool, kudos to them, because I really like the latest oracles and also I really like the cooperation that they have with Sam Rook. And the tarot decks that they published, designed by her. And also I have to say Hay House with the matte cardstock. So I think that more and more publishers are listening to the tarot community, to the tarot influencers, and to the fact that perhaps, and I just mean perhaps, I'm not too sure, but perhaps there's a few tarot readers that work for the publishing companies, and they actually know what they're talking about when they talk about the difference between cardstock and the size of the cards, and you know, the guidebooks and how deep they go into the meaning of the cards, etc. So perhaps they have some consultants. So let's have a look at these two tarot. First one, the Lorenzi, because I think it's from late last year, or as I said at the beginning, perhaps it's mid 2022, but I only got it now because it is not easy to get new editions from new publications from US games. What I really appreciate about this deck is, first of all, the quality of the box is exceptional. It is on the larger side, which means that, you know, if you have storage problems, that could not be a good point, obviously. But I kind of get it because they also want to up the ante when it comes to the guidebook. And this guidebook is the production value of the guidebook. And I'm not talking about the specific guidebook for this specific deck. Okay, so I'm literally just showing you this as an example. The production value is really good. So the cardstock is amazing. Let's make some room, otherwise I can't show you properly. If we look at the images, it's full colored. It's the glossy kind of paper, but it's a good gloss. This binding is excellent because you can really use the book as many times as you want. You can open it at any page, and you know it has enough weight on the edges of the page so that you can just, it's not difficult to keep it open, if you know what I mean. When it's a shorter kind of book, you have to struggle to have it lay flat or to keep it open. So yeah, this is really a plus, and I really enjoy it. And what I really enjoy is that this is a very unconventional deck as well. So they really did fantastic things in encouraging artists with a different view on tarot, which is always exceptionally good, because when you have diversity, that's when you improve. It's when you have a wider perspective that you can gather more knowledge about, you know, tarot, but anything in general. The cardstock is, I would say, it's more similar to the one we've seen from the decks from the 80s. It definitely does not have the plasticky feels of the late 90s. However, it feels even different in the sense that it feels almost more papery. And one thing that I'm not entirely sure is that the edges feel a bit sharp, but it might be because this deck is relatively, it's actually rather new. So it might be that once that I start using it, I will not feel this kind of scratching feeling on the fingers when I use it. Very good production, as I said. Another tarot deck that I feel like everyone has got recently, and it's not this one, I'm referring to the Fyodor Pavlov tarot. In that case, the production value is superb. Absolutely nothing to say, nothing bad to say about that. But because everyone has got that one and not everyone has got this one, I just wanted to show you this one. So I opened it already because the outer box is not that easy to you know, slide out of the sleeve, and I didn't want to stay on camera for 3 hours. So this is very similar when it comes to production value. It's very similar to the Fyodor Pavlov. However, this one has got an even smaller you know, 2-part box with the thumb cut out, which is very similar to the Spirit Song, if you ask me. Although it's not as decorated, because this is not meant to be sold like that. Obviously it comes with a bigger box. The one major thing that I really love is that they managed to keep these decks at reasonable prices, or at least they sell at a reasonable price here in Australia. But they even give you a hardcover book, which is amazing, and which we've seen definitely with the Fyodor Pavlov as well. Not just that, but the images are in color. There's a lot, you know, of description. It's absolutely amazing. This production value is superb. I am in awe of what has been done with this tarot deck. So just to give you an idea of the dimension of the tarot. Now this one could be a bit of a problem because it is on the large side, and obviously they kept it consistent with, as I showed you before, the Spirit Song or the Mystical Moment, for example. It's more like that kind of side. The Lorenzi Tarot is a different shape altogether. This one, however, has a slight difference. So the cardstock is different. The cardstock is very papery, so it's matte. The tactile feel is very papery. However, it's not the kind of papery. I'm thinking everyone has been talking about the Midnight Magic. I don't have it yet, but everyone has been complaining about that cardstock as being too flimsy. this one will not give you that feeling. This one is actually, it feels like it's, you know, it's a deck that you can use. Let me zoom in. It's not gilded, which is fine because you can edge it yourself if you want. I love the colors. But yeah, I really like this way in which the direction that they're taking when publishing decks now, because I feel like, you know, when it comes to the size, it's probably something personal. Obviously, there's a lot of people with bigger heads than mine, so they wouldn't have any problems in using this deck. So for what concerns me, that's the only thing that I'm thinking, yeah, but I wish, you know, it was slightly smaller. But when it comes to everything else, I really, really like this. And I appreciate what they're doing. I appreciate the fact that they are inviting, you know, all different kinds of authors to publish their works with them, which is always really interesting, because what will be interesting in the next couple of years, it will be to see how many indie authors will still publish their deck as an independent production first, and they will not go to US Games and ask them whether they want to publish their decks. Because we've seen so many indie authors publish eventually with US Games, that I feel that there might be a shift coming. There might be independent creators that they don't want to bother with the Kickstarter anymore and all the problems that come with the responsibility on the printing, the logistics of it, you know, the headaches. And they'll just go to US Games and see whether they are going to be picked up. I don't know, I might be wrong, but I've seen it over and over and over again. Many indie decks that US Games have actually picked up for publication. So these were the decks by, as I said, US Games that I wanted to show you. These are the most recent ones that I have. And now let's have a look at the most recent ones that I have from Lo Scarabeo, just to compare, you know, the evolution on the production value of these two publishers as we've done the whole video. Now, this one is a bit of a standout from Lo Scarabeo. This is the Symbolic Soul Tarot by Elisa Seisinger. I've talked about this deck so many times in my channel that if you watch my channel, you're probably tired of hearing about this deck and how much I love this deck. So it does have that kind of two-part box that now has become more and more common by Lo Scarabeo, which I really like. Although many of them used to be glossy, this is actually matte. And the surprise about this deck, let me zoom in, is that what they've done is they actually expanded even more on the guidebook, which I am very grateful for. They still have a few languages, which I don't believe it's necessary again. However, what I really enjoyed is that there's a lot more description when it comes to the cards, and at the end of the descriptions, there's a section which is called Behind the Curtain, where they actually go through some of the quirkiest cards, and they give you even more details about the specific card that we're looking at. And I've actually filmed a video that I called the Tarot Easter Eggs, in which I actually showed you this, because I think that there's some Easter eggs in this deck that you don't necessarily know about, which are very interesting. What they've done on a production level, this is a matte cardstock. It's papery. It's a lot sturdier than the Tarot of Tales by US Games, by the way. This feels almost stiff. However, I can assure you that once you start using this deck, it riffle shuffles like a charm. It's fantastic. It fans out really well. Overall, it's an excellent deck when it comes to the logistics of reading. Whether you like the artwork or not, it's a different story, obviously. But what I do enjoy as well is that we've got this gold, matte gold foil on the cards, but it's very subtle. It's not something too shiny that would, you know, drag you away from the card, or that would just distract you. And it's an excellent production. It's a very chunky deck, as you can see. so obviously, you know, again with the same problem. However, this one, because it's smaller, it's the consistent size that Lo Scarabeo has always been in, you know, publishing. It's actually not that difficult for me to reshuffle, but I really enjoy this deck. I enjoy, it's the kind of, not just the tactile feel to it, but so when you do this, it's the kind of friction between two papery cards that reminds me a lot of the Emperor Nora tarot. So the sound of the cards together is very nice as well. And I need to say that it's very conducive for a reading. Now, it may seem like these details are actually not very relevant, but I can assure you that you need all these kind of small things to get you in the right set of mind when you're reading, when you're giving a reading. And so when I was complaining about a couple of things, and for example, the US Games decks that had the tuck flap at the bottom as well, and so you look really awkward when you try and fit in a deck back into the box, because you know you're reading for someone, they're looking at you, right? And so you're telling them stuff that could actually be very important for them. You don't want them to lose confidence in you, and they definitely will if they see you just fumble around with that. And those were minor things that were negative to me. But I'm also going to say that there's also good minor things that are actually good for me when it comes to the logistics of giving a reading. And having a really good experience when holding a deck, the tactile experience and the audible experience are very important as well. So I just wanted to say that because it may look like they're non-important details, but they actually are. So this is the Symbolic Soul Tarot, but another deck which is even more recent, and I think that I've shown this in my channel just once, is the Dark Side of Tarot, which is, so the book is by Sasha Graham, very famous, and the illustrator is Corrado Roy, which is my favorite illustrator ever. So this one is a bit of a standout when it comes to special productions in Lo Scarabeo, because it's got a wraparound magnetic closure kind of box, as you can tell. And so it's actually really nice. The book, the guidebook, is like an actual book. Very, very beautiful with, well, this specific deck is, you'll see that there's a whenever you have a card, you also have the traditional RWS card from 1909, and the reason is that because this deck is the dark side of the traditional one, so it doesn't mean that, obviously it doesn't mean that all the future decks which will come in this kind of setup will have the same setup in the book. But it's very, very enjoyable. The tactile feel, the size of the book, it feels like a decent sized book. By the way, you probably have noticed by now that I haven't mentioned Llewellyn once. Not because I don't have decks by Llewellyn, I don't have many, I have to be honest. But simply because Llewellyn has also been, for example, distributing Lo Scarabeo in the US. So I feel like whenever I buy something in Amazon, they will say Llewellyn, but it's actually Lo Scarabeo, simply because it's been distributed by Llewellyn. And one day I will definitely talk about Llewellyn, but today I just wanted to focus between, you know, on Lo Scarabeo versus US Games. Llewellyn is a fantastic publisher as well, and they're also doing wonderful things for the tarot community. So I'm not too impressed by the cardstock, to be honest with you. It feels, it's glossy, not Mystical Moment kind of glossy, but it's still glossy, it catches the light, but it's also very plasticky. It feels really, really plasticky, which is not the best of feels. So, you know, I was very happy when I saw this. I'm very happy about the box. I'm very happy about the guidebook. And of course, I love the artwork, but only relating to the production value, I'm not too keen on this cardstock, even though it fans like a charm, but it's actually that kind of cardstock that might be a bit slippery. Although I have to say I have been reading a couple of times with this and I haven't had any major problems with cards, you know, just running away from me. So we'll see, because I've only had it for not long, and I have a backlog of decks that I need to go through. So perhaps I'll change my mind. I don't know. But I just wanted to show you this because it is the latest one of my Lo Scarabeo decks. Again, I feel like we're more or less at the same level, in the sense that where both publishers are up in the ante and really showing what the best practices could be when it comes to new publications. There's still hits and misses, and again, I'm saying that from my personal point of view, which, you know, people may not agree. So, and it's absolutely fine. But I feel like we're still head to head, and I haven't really decided. And I started this video without an idea of where this was going to go, in the sense that I told myself that I wanted to be completely unbiased, and I wanted to have this bit of an analysis of the production value throughout the decades of these two publishers. And I just realized that I love these decks, all of them, so Lo Scarabeo and US Games, so much that I cannot actually separate the feelings and the memories that I have bonded with these decks from the publisher itself. So it's going to be very difficult. What I wanted to do, though, I wanted to show you a couple of oracle decks from both Lo Scarabeo and US Games, because I feel that there hasn't been that many from Lo Scarabeo, at least, in the sense that US Games have been publishing oracle decks for a while now, whereas we see more and more Lo Scarabeo coming to the scene of the oracle decks in the latest years. And I have two of them, and one is very recent, whereas this one from US Games is not that recent. It's from 2020. So okay, it's not an old deck, okay, but it's not as recent as the Musha by Lo Scarabeo. When it comes to the quality, I feel like in this case, US Games has got the upper hand, because for the simple reason that they're actually very consistent. So the quality of the cardstock is very good. It's not as good as I said, the original cardstock from US Games in the 80s. The production value is good. It's they come with the 2-part box. The guidebook is quite nice. We see that on the Mystical Moment Oracle as well. I like the fact that it's 44 cards, which is still, I would prefer if they had at least 50, but that depends on the deck itself. Although I have to say that when it comes to Lo Scarabeo, there seems to be a bit of a pattern lately on producing very thin decks, thin in the sense that they don't have that many cards. And I wanted to show you one bad example. So the Journey of a Lonely Soul, it's a fantastic deck, absolutely fantastic, gorgeous, incredibly deep, also incredibly dark, if I may say. And by the way, in the southern hemisphere, we're going towards Samhain. So I think it's between Friday and Saturday. So I will definitely be using this deck. But as you can see, okay, it's the kind of ugly kind of gloss, which I really don't like. I do understand why they did that in this case, because the cards are rather dark. Some cards are really dark, and therefore if you you need the gloss to make them, let's say, brighter, which is fine, but it's only 32 cards. And I'm like, well, okay, but you should price it for a 32 card deck then, not for a major deck. You know what I mean? It's up to you if the author, the creator, only wants to stop at 32, but then don't make me pay as if it were a 50 or a 60 card deck, because it's not, it's half that. And I know that the production value doesn't work that way, the costs don't work that way, but still, it feels like it's a bit of a not a fair price. And I also wanted to say that when it comes to the Alphonse Mouchard. So this is a very recent publication, if not from this year, it must be from the last months of last year. And on one hand, the guidebook is always, you know, several languages is always, although it doesn't seem, they don't have Russian this time, they only have French, Italian, and English and Spanish. But it's also a small deck. I think it's 34 cards or something like that. And it's just, it's paper. It is literally paper. This is, it's a matte, but it's not just paperish. It feels like paper. I'm actually kind of concerned when shuffling. I need to be very careful. Never riffle shuffle a deck like that. You will definitely ruin it. It will start literally coming out at the edges. I haven't used it too much, but I'm actually really concerned. And as you can see, it does have a bit of a bow, probably because of the humidity, and it might be because I live in Australia, and fair enough, absolutely. Or it might be because this one actually bought it from the Amazon US store, so it had to come this way. There's a number of reasons, but I have to say I'm not a fan of this cardstock, although it feels like it's similar to the symbolic soul, but the symbolic soul, because it's a smaller size, actually has more sturdiness to it. This one, because it's an oracle size, it just feels fragile. And even though it's a fantastic deck, because the artwork is absolutely magnificent, as you can tell, as you can see, I don't feel like using it. There's no keywords, there's just a number. I always have to go back to the guidebook, which is a bit disappointing, because you feel like you have to kind of learn the meanings, you have to memorize them, which is not very easy. So I don't know, to be honest, it's a beautiful deck, but because we're looking at the production value, I mean, Lo Scarabeo, when it comes to oracle decks, I feel like they're not quite there yet. So my vote goes 100% to US Games, because US Games, regardless of whether you like the deck or not, the cardstock is great. Not the best one, but at least it's not papery. It's matte, so it doesn't catch the light. You know, it's got keywords, it's got a decent number of cards. So there's a number of things that, you know, really push me to go for it, for US Games in this case. But that was it. So thank you so much for watching this video till now. Let me know in the comments below, because I'm very curious to see this. As I said at the beginning, and I kept on repeating during the video, it's just my personal opinion, and you might disagree with that, and I'm absolutely open to hear what you have to say. And maybe you have different decks that you want to compare, especially when it comes to oracle decks from Lo Scarabeo. If you have an example of an oracle deck that is actually really good production value, let me know, because I definitely want to check it out. And so yeah, absolutely, let me know what you think. It will be so much fun. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps a lot. More to come. Have a great day.